What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of What If Naruto Was the King of Chaos Part 1. And if you did enjoy the video, give this video a like. And if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 1. The new King of Chaos prologue. Naruto was reborn in a regular world when his heart stopped beating on the same day he was appointed Hokage. And I want him to die in the most unbelievable death you have ever seen and be sent to another world. Naruto's point of view. As I stepped out of the outside reception area into the dimming lights of the early evening, I swung my small duffel bag over my shoulder and tucked my mask under my arm. After finishing my 2 hours at the fencing club, all I could think about was coming home, throwing everything I was carrying into some dusty corner of my room, and plopping into my desk chair in front of my computer. Perhaps I should stop by the convenience shop for a quick snack. Mum did tell me to bring a bottle of milk home, now that I think about it. A bag of cheese puffs and some Coke would be welcome. It would also not go unnoticed on Animathon night. That's what I call a Saturday night spent binge-watching anime until this time tomorrow, Sasumi. This week has been crazy. Exams begin on Monday morning. Coursework submissions are due Tuesday afternoon. University applications are due Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, spring cleaning before college, then the start of a new unit in my physics class. Today, Friday, I'll be competing in a fencing match for 2 hours. Not to mention daily housework, shopping trips, part-time employment, and other obligations. I don't think I've ever had a busier week. So, there was that time I threw a pizza party for my birthday, and no one showed up. Let's move on. There was something else, but I can't remember what it was. Honk. 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 In the midst of the crossing, I noticed a pair of headlights that were as dazzling as two suns. The guiding lights in my final moments as my life flashed before my eyes, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the impending disaster of a terrible and messy death. Psych. I propelled myself backward with the foot I had stretched out in front of me, using panther-like reflexes. Just in time, too, as the vehicle sped by me, just touching the rubber of the tip of my sneakers. I stepped back onto the pavement, my heart thumping a little less than it had the first time this happened on Tuesday night. Oh, yes, I remember. 6 times in 4 days, I've been nearly ran over by a truck that appeared out of nowhere. It's almost as if it's the same truck every time. Dark blue vehicle with yellow headlights, no trace of a driver behind the wheel due to heavily tinted front shields. That's not legal. Well, anything. Have better luck the next time. I've got too much to live for to die in such a corny fashion as my animathon. When I first walked into the store, I went straight to the fridges for a bottle of semi-skimmed milk, then to the cheese puffs a couple of aisles over. When it came to fizzy drinks, I couldn't find my favorite soda on the stores. Bummer. Oh well, there's a fizzy orange right here, so why not take it? Oh, and I'm not opposed to a packet of toffees. I paused again as I passed the cheese puffs. A little gluttonous to take another one. Then again, you only get one life. Was this the standard ironic remark that cursed my entire existence? Could be, but probably not. That jerk tends to do whatever he wants whenever he wants. Returning to the present, I picked another large bag of cheese puffs and proceeded to the self-checkout. As I was putting everything on the scale, I was thinking about what I was going to watch tonight. It was early winter, and there was almost no decent anime coming out at this time of year. As a result, tonight had to be a nostalgic animathon. What should I watch again? Whatever I ended up viewing was going to be fantasy. Lost yourself in dreams and fairy tales for a while, letting go of reality for a while. It's most likely fantasy, with a dash of action thrown in for good measure. I scanned my club card and watched with delight as 2 units of cash were deducted from the amount. It may not appear to be much, but you have no idea how much an influence it will have in the long term. I returned to the open, stuffing my belongings into my bag. The sun was mostly set by this point, but its light was still causing crimson streaks in the sky. I frowned when I saw this. In the cold, evening came far too swiftly, and it only got faster as time passed. I walked back home, shoulders squared. My attention returned to the ground, and I pondered the critical decision of what to watch tonight once more. Fantasy and action. It'd be good to watch 7 Deadly Sins again. Despite the fact that it is quite long. For 4 seasons, there were 24 episodes every season, plus the 2 features that had been released. If it hadn't already happened, another spin-off series was on the way. Even though the spin-off has begun, I'm not going to watch it right now. My motto is to wait until everything has passed and then watch it all at once. Come on, aren't we all in agreement here? Right? Then again, I could watch Danmachi again. Concepts of action, magic, eki, and fantasy. Despite the fact that the protagonist irritates me. Heroic grandeur and all that nonsense. Perhaps I'm being too harsh on him, but come on. In this world, children as young as 5 or 6 give up their dreams of becoming heroes. You'd think that in a society where death is expected to lurk around every corner, children would mature faster. It didn't matter that he was a cringy, sweaty, thin, stuttering, mumbling, groveling little prat. Decisions, decisions, decisions. I was surprised as a lump of some gray dark stuff fell down the pavement in front of me. Some of it spilled on my jeans and shoes as a result of the hit. I took a breather and looked up to see the perpetrator sitting on a lamppost, gazing down its beak at me with beady eyes. It cooed at me as if mocking me for getting me with its filthy muck, as I realized that was what had hit the pavement. I despise pigeons. I thought solemnly. I called out when I returned home a few minutes later. Mum. I waited for a response for a few seconds before receiving none. Must still be at work. I muttered something. I hung my shoes on the rack and went upstairs to the loft, which had been transformed into my own bedroom. First and foremost, leave the snack bag by the desk, turn on the computer, and start watching my show. Priorities, priorities, priorities. I locked the door and proceeded back up the small flight of stairs that led to my room after fully washing up and putting on a dressing gown. I sat down at my workstation, put on my headphones, and began my show. I decided on Danmachi. It had to have happened around midnight. I'd shoved a fistful of cheese puffs down my throat. But, to my dismay, a piece of it broke off and fell down the incorrect track. The powdery sensation of the puffs scraping over the sides of my neck and windpipe as I desperately begged for air was the most tortuous-dying moment I could imagine. However, in what I believe was the last second before my soul was due to depart my body, I blinked and found myself on a wide balcony-style platform overlooking a valley that could only exist in a storybook. A voice from behind distracted me, so I didn't have much time to think. About damn time you got here. In general, about damn time you got here. The young man looked around, perplexed, until he found the source of the voice. It came from another young man who didn't appear to be much older than him. He sat at a tea table, with a cup of steaming tea in front of him. Another chair was opposite him, with another cup and a teapot in front of it. Please have a seat. The tea has relaxing properties. I want you to be calm before we discuss. The stranger indicated the chair. He was dressed casually in a hoodie, trousers, and black sneakers. The young man paused for a while before striding up to the chair and settling in. As any kind host would, the stranger poured him a cup of tea before drawing back and quietly waiting. The young man took a sip, still unable to come to terms with what had just happened. It just took one sip for his mind to clear of all thoughts and he could finally focus on the scene in front of him. The last thing he recalled was choking on a cheese puff before waking up on the balcony of a castle. As he spoke again, he looked up at his unexpected companion. Hello, my name is Hamura. And you're in Valorant, my own personal dimension led, if you will. It is a universe where I am Lord and Master and exist just for my own benefit. Naruto, you've read enough fiction and fanfiction to understand what's going on right now. You're a god? The newly revealed Naruto asked. Hamura smiled before taking another sip from his cup. Yes, yes. However, it is not your conventional one. What exactly do you mean? I wasn't always like this. I was once a normal mortal like you before being given the opportunity to live on a separate planet as whomever I chose to be. Since then, I've roamed the omniverse, going wherever I am pleased and doing whatever I pleased, eventually ascending to omnipotence. Now, I just sit in my domain, watching events unfold in all realities. So you brought me here to be reincarnated into another world? Indeed. As his earlier comments came to memory, Naruto grimaced, his stare growing piercing towards the deity. What did you mean earlier when you said, about damn time? Were you attempting to bring me here on purpose? Hamura made a shaky motion with his head. No, I was just watching you. I was hoping the truck would take you out, and I could just snag your soul and bring you here in the typical anime context. Truck-kun killed him and took him to a god to be reincarnated. But you kept avoiding me, and my patience was wearing thin. Fortunately, you choked on your gluttony just as I lost interest. Glad to see that my death experiences amuse you, Naruto mumbled. If it's any consolation, it'll be first in my book of the funniest moments in death. It'll probably be there for a while because I can't think of anything more entertaining than that. Naruto grunted and sipped his tea again. Hamura sighed and folded his arms on the table. With that out of the way, let's talk about your reincarnation. I'll give you 3. No, thank you. Hamura gave a blink, and then he blinked again. Excuse me. I said no, thank you. Huh. Are you really saying you don't want to be reincarnated in a fantasy world? With your own cheats? Could you tell me why? It's unusual for someone to turn down such an opportunity. I don't want to be reincarnated into a different life for the sake of some god's entertainment. You claim to be omnipotent. Then I utilized it to send myself back to my old life, when I was completely pleased. Why would you want to lead such a boring life in the normal world when you could have a new one in what was to you a fictional one? Because these universes aren't only for entertainment, as you imply. Living in a world where you are constantly afraid of some superpowered madman destroying your life every day. A life in which death is within grasp at all times. A society in which the concept of human rights may not be regarded seriously. Where is life difficult and long without technology and my normal pleasures? Nah, I'll skip. Hamura sat back in his chair. You seem to think you have a choice in this. Naruto rose to his feet. And you're going to force me into something I don't want to be in, to provide me with something I don't desire. Hamura just nodded. Wow, that's incredibly arrogant. Necros gave him a friendly smile. You'll understand why you don't have a choice one day. You're going anyway. I can't possibly express anything here, so here you go. When Hamura raised his hand, a sword materialized in it. Naruto examined it closely, puzzled as to why it suddenly seemed familiar before his eyes widened. Yes, this is Excalibur, the holy sword from the 7 deadly sins. You will be the next king of chaos when the time comes. Until that time. Why? Naruto was about to finish when Hamura's hurled the sword at him, striking his chest and knocking him over. Instead of descending to the ground, he found himself falling through clouds. Clouds. Naruto pondered before gazing down to see himself miles up in the sky, and what he saw was a city rapidly expanding by the second. That little shithead. Says the narrator. Naruto flailed around in the air, desperately groping for something to grab onto. His hand slid into the grip of his sword. In frightened perplexity, he gazed at the blade. Isn't this supposed to be a magical sword? Isn't it capable of doing something to assist me? But before he could act, his palm crashed with a bird that had arrived out of nowhere in the sky. The sword was yanked from his grip and began hurtling away from him. Naruto knew, dejectedly, that wherever the sword went, he would be far away from where he was supposed to land. What was a sword going to do for me in any way? He desperately looked about for any sign of salvation. His eyes were drawn to something in the distance. He noticed a large tower in the middle of a medieval-looking city in the distance. He squinted slightly, trying to recall where he had seen this skyscraper previously. It hit him all at once. Where he was and what that tower was. The Babel Tower. That indicates. I'm currently in Danmachi. Unbeknownst to him, his body was shrinking and becoming transparent. By the time he recognized what world he was in, he transformed into a dazzling globe of light. Anyone walking down the street that night would have seen a bright light rocket through a window. A woman screamed a few moments later, as well as a baby's cries. As his characteristic warp gate in the floor closed, Hamura smirked. He took an hourglass from his pocket and placed it on the table, commencing the countdown to the point where the top half was completely empty of sand. He got to his feet, folded his arms behind his back, and went off the balcony into the room below. By the time that hourglass runs out, your life will have produced a nice new anime show for me to watch. Have fun, Naruto. That appears to be your new name. The King of Chaos, Naruto Uzumaki. He turned to walk away again before coming to a halt. Wait a minute. I forgot about the blessing. He lifted his left hand, displaying slightly sharper than normal nails. He squeezed a large drop of blood from his finger by driving his thumb into it. A small warp gate opened beneath it, engulfing it whole, before it could strike the earth. This will be another cheat for you. Technically, it's not as if it would help you. But everything will be fine. Now, Naruto, please entertain me. It feels fantastic to be back in Naruto's shoes. Naruto's point of view. Naruto Uzumaki is my name. Some unknown parents raised me who I don't care to mention for a good reason. I say this because those two morons were complete street rats who gorged themselves on narcotics and scavenged for money in the dirt. Just to save up for a bottle of that excessively pricey and awful Soma wine. In such filth, I could never grasp what others said or tasted. Whenever a bottle was opened near me, my nose was assailed by one of the most horrible aromas I had ever encountered in my life. It was formerly at the top of my list of nasty odors, but not right now, because my current job required me to encounter odors significantly worse than 100 Soma wine bottles combined. I was a homeless street rat living in Daedalus Street's lowest, darkest cesspits, in the midst of slums. A place where no self-respecting individual who cared about themselves would ever consider walking. Those who lived there were those who had the misfortune of being born there, for no one ever came in, and few ever got out. At the age of 3, I was forced by my stupid parents to work in one of the dirtiest and most dangerous jobs. One of many stinky, underpaid, and tough sewage cleaners. Every morning at dusk, armed with only a brush, a small hammer, and a chisel, I would leave our rotten shack of a home, which was little more than a toilet cubicle-sized hut with holes in the roof and sand on the floor, and venture out into the world to chip off dried muck that had accumulated around the rims of the manholes leading to the sewers. What a fantastic start to life, full of aspiration and the promise of glory, no doubt. 1 year later, I was regarded as the most dependable person in my neighborhood. I did what I did with considerable reluctance, but with tremendous joy, hoping that one of the morons who wobble about in their doors when I collected my cash might drop a few valis or so in their drunken stupor. It's not like I had much a choice, given that I was now completely alone in the world. In their frenzied need for the heavenly wine, my parents attempted to mug a member of the Soma Familia themselves, and ended up being beheaded in an alleyway. Nobody gave a damn. Nobody has ever done so. Not even myself. That was simply the awful reality of life. Every decision brings you closer to death or to more money. It was all that everybody cared about. Nobody had time for a barefooted child in rags who was strolling around with a hammer and rusted chisel stuck in the top of his pants after being booted out of his shack by another mad junkie. But that was fine. Because I voluntarily left. Because among the crowds who lived in that cramped area, I was also known by another name. The film, The Cursed Child. The boy who drew demons. Whatever rationale drunk junkies could conjure up in their intoxicated minds to explain why, when an older boy tried to stab me, his body ended up brutally mangled and twisted, like a wet cloth being wrung of its water, except in this case the water was replaced by blood, stomach juices, and other substances that nobody wanted to know about. It was the first time I saw death, the first time I cried in terror as I saw life snuffed out in front of my eyes. I'd seen blood for the first time and feared the incomprehensible unknown. Because the unknown followed me everywhere I went. One day, a rabid dog I had disturbed in a small gap in a house wall came rushing out, barking violently and madly in wrath and blind hunger. I could do nothing except wait for death, paralyzed by horror of the incoming maw filled with sharp teeth and filthy drool. But, once again, an unknown intervention spared me, and the dog's tongue was torn clear out of its mouth, followed by its neck pipes and guts. As blood pooled around its torso, it dropped down on the filthy concrete with a sickened slop. I believe my reaction was less violent and more terrified than before because I had already witnessed something similar happen, and this time, it was not another human. Slowly but steadily, as minor occurrences like this occurred throughout my life, my dread began to fade, and I gained a sense of confidence, knowing that in a life or death scenario, some mysterious force would not allow me to die. But I was still worried because it didn't protect me from cuts and burns. The time I was sleeping on a wall and fell off in my sleep, scraping and cutting my back on jagged rocks and sandy surfaces was perfect proof of that. I couldn't see my back, but I knew I had a few scars and imperfections that would last the rest of my life. It didn't really matter. In the life I was born into, such a thing was insignificant. Speaking of sleep, It was around the time my parents died that I began having vivid dreams. I would fantasize about a whole new world. Instead of stone, the roads in it were formed of a substance that appeared to be soft but was actually rigid. Ordinary folks lived in massive skyscrapers and skyscraper-like constructions, similarly to the enormous Babel Tower, which threw a terrible shadow over the entire underground city. People would walk about to get around, and if they couldn't, they'd board these metal cocoons on wheels, which came in a variety of colors, shapes, and sizes. Trips that would typically take months were reduced to hours. I'd see huge metal birds fly across the sky and disappear into the clouds in it. It wasn't until I had more of these nightmares that I realized these birds truly transported individuals to other areas in their bellies and claimed to be able to depart those stomachs whenever they pleased. I dreamt of living with a foreign woman I imagined would be my mother. She constantly wore a beautiful smile, and every look she gave me was so full of love and warmth that I nearly choked on tears. Except when I brought 10 valis home and she sobbed about why I hadn't brought more. My own mother had never noticed my presence. I fantasized about performing strange activities. One looked like swordsmanship, but it wasn't anything like the swords I'd seen adventurers wielding. It was a small, pointed metal stick with a flower on the end used exclusively for parrying and jabbing. In my fantasies, I was the best and most unbeatable. If only it were true, if only it was true. For someone like myself, the only possible path to prosperity was that of an explorer. After all, there have been legends about great heroes rising from humble origins to become a shining beacon of light and hope for everybody. In the end, though, they were just that, fiction. Despite its danger and poor quality of life, Daedalus was the safest place I could be. Orario had entered the dreaded, dark days, as everyone referred to them. A time when horrible gods and their maniacal followers massacred adventurers, citizens, and gods alike, and blood poured like rivers through the streets of the ostensibly center of the world. Many people wanted to go to Orario, the city of riches, fame, power, and ladies. They should have realized they were walking right into a death sentence the moment they stepped inside. Those who did realize frequently died not more than a day later. It didn't take long for me to recognize there was something wrong with me. The constant occurrences around me, mixed with the lucid and vivid dreams, as well as the fact that I seemed to have an innate willpower that other kids around me did not, all suggested that there was something wrong with me. Something unusual has occurred. Something that made me a freak. That's why, as I walked, others would step out of my way, and everyone would have a cautious look in their eyes, even in the haze, and wouldn't let down their guard until I was at least 30 feet away. Every day, this was my life. I scraped and chipped away at excrement around the edges and walls of manholes from dawn to dusk, and at night, I shivered from the cold and the disturbing vividness of dreams that were nothing but torture for me, as I was constantly bombarded by scenes of privilege and comfort that I realized would never be a reality for me. Perhaps I was possessed by demons. Demons who only wanted to torture me with thoughts of all I wanted but couldn't have. The cursed child. So my despair stayed with me for another year. Winter had passed, and the cold mornings of spring had crept up on my frail, emaciated, and starved body. I awakened every day and showered in a puddle I'd located on a rooftop. The roof had somewhat caved in, but not enough to enable entry to the inside. It constructed a small tub for me to fill with rainwater. When it froze, all I had to do was hammer at it, splitting the ice into pieces. I'd then warm them by rubbing them between my frigid palms before wiping down my entire body. By then, the rest of the ice would have melted, allowing me to wash my clothes in all the filth that had gathered. It was a poor attempt since no matter what I did, I resembled a filthy little gutter rat. But this simple wash meant the world to me. I was working on an extremely large manhole one day that no one else dared to approach. I didn't either until today because people were notorious for falling in and then vanishing into who knows where, never to be seen again. All of the others had a few kids brushing and scrambling at them, gleefully ripping away chunks of other people's feces in the hopes of being handed enough valis to afford a mouthful of food as their only meal of the day. So I was dangling over the edge of the massive hole, hammering away at the rocky face to scrape off the petrified mud and let it fall into what appeared to be an underground river. This was done to keep the hole from becoming clogged and overflowing with unpleasant thoughts. But I soon discovered why people were falling. Because today, as I was leaning into a literal maw of death, the road's poor maintenance decided to turn on me, as the tile my body was on abruptly lifted up due to my weight being concentrated on one end of it. I was hurled headfirst into the creek, clawing my elbows and feet futilely along the stone ledges. What happened next has always been a haze to me, as I felt cold water wrap me from all sides. I couldn't tell up from down, and I was carried away by an unknown force. Despite my twisting and mute screaming, I couldn't find anything to grab or anything to obstruct my path. All I could do was beg God not to let me run out of breath during this wet turmoil. My starving 5-year-old body stood little chance against a raging deluge. When I was spit out of a rock cliff wall and thrown into a pool of water, my prayers were partially answered. It was a 50-foot drop, and I received a quick read on my new surroundings as I flew. I'd arrived in some type of underground cave, with only a break in the high ceiling providing light. I was collapsing into a pool of water that only covered 3/4 of the tunnel I was in. I was dead set on getting to a bank as quickly as possible. So I cannonballed into the icy pool and swam as fast as my untrained body could to the shore. My strokes and splashes slowed and weakened as I returned to a dry surface. I looked up, my upper half on sand and my lower half in water, to take in my surroundings once more. Along the water's edge, there were plants that appeared to be holding these small red berries. The cavern was foggy and dim. Not far away was the cavern's wall, which resembled the cliff from which I'd jumped. But it was the lone source of light that caught my attention. The only source of light, as previously said, was a crack in the roof hundreds of feet above the ground. The beams of sunlight that made their way through rested on a stone chair, or, to be more precise, a worn-out throne. The sun's rays illuminated it and the surroundings. But the last item that drew my attention before I passed out from tiredness was a beautiful sword embedded in the throne. When I opened my eyes again, the cavern was darker than before. As my eyes acclimated to the darkness, I could hardly see in front of my face. But, thanks to the moonlight that broke through the crack in the ceiling, I was able to see again. It was bitterly cold outside. It was bitterly cold. I was half submerged in water as well. I dashed out the door, hoping to avoid catching a cold as a result of this. I disbelieved that because I bathed in ice-cold water all winter. In any case, I wasn't short of possibilities. After squeezing as much water as I could out of my torn jeans and pulling them back on, I looked around to see what I had to deal with. The moonlight coming in illuminated the plants growing along the water's edge. I stumbled over to them, recalling the berries dangling from their small branches. When I discovered lush, small berries that appeared to be bursting with juice, my stomach groaned in agreement, and my heart soared. I grabbed the branch as soon as I got there, only to hiss and back away. As I examined my frozen hand, I felt something warm flow down my palm. I sniffed it to confirm my concerns. Blood. And why is this the case? Because the branches were infested with tiny thorns. Several were caught in the meaty part of my hands. I swallowed the wounds after carefully dragging them out with my teeth, hoping that they would dry sufficiently to prevent any more leakage. A breeze touched me from somewhere, and as I followed the wind's course, my gaze was drawn to something I had completely forgotten about. The throne was built of stone. The majority of the moonlight rays were concentrated in that area, resting on the outline of the fantastic sword from earlier. Even from this distance, I could tell this sword was of great quality. Or, at the very least, it appeared to be superior to any other blade I'd ever seen. The hilt gleamed in the moonlight with the glimmer of gold, the same gold I'd seen on 1,000 Valis coin, an uncommon sight in Daedalus slums. When my stomach growled again, I was about to go investigate. I guess the sword's not going anywhere. I mean, I'm the only one in this pit. This time, I carefully plucked only the fruit from the branches and bit into it to fulfill my hunger. It wasn't exactly as tasty as I had hoped. Instead, it tasted sour, like a fallen plum, and I'd seized it before anyone else could notice and steal it. It wasn't horrible, and I ate around 15 of them before I was full. I snuck back to the water and drank a lot of it. It was so cold that I believed my teeth would freeze. After a few scoops, I realized I'd gotten here through the sewers, which meant the water could be contaminated. I mean, it wasn't all that bad. It tasted like plain water. That meant it was safe, didn't it? I shrugged and drank until I saw something in the water. I discovered what it was after taking a closer look. My old hammer had also made its way to the pool's edge. I moved gingerly up there, picking up my old tool. I looked about for my chisel, but I couldn't find it. It's not like it could help me in this situation. I didn't think a rusted old chisel could assist me get out of here. As much as the low light levels allowed, I took a good look about it. Except for the rock face, which had water rushing down it, the entire cavern was round in shape. I couldn't climb it since it was simply too tall for me, and I couldn't get out the way I was brought in. The only place for me to stand was on the sliver of bank I was standing on. Everything else was water. I returned my concentration to the stone chair, this time getting closer to inspecting the treasure embedded in the seat. As I drew closer to the sword, I could see it in greater detail. If my eyes were correct, the hilt was made of gold. The handle was intricately carved with flowing swirls, and gems were inserted in the portion where the blade connected. The blade itself was of conventional shape, yet it glistened magnificently with a silvery gleam in the night. The sharpness of its edges glistened. I put my palm out, mesmerized, hesitating for a moment while my head stretched. For someone like myself to touch something so precious and expensive looking was sacrilegious. That's when I noticed it. A thin murmur resonated around the cave, phantom tones permeating the air all around me. Grab the key. Unlock the door. I spun around and yelled. Who's there? My eyes darted up and down, searching for someone who could have been lurking someplace, anyplace. There weren't many areas where someone could hide without being noticed. The shrubs were too small for anyone to crouch in. They couldn't be hanging out there because the cliff wall was too smooth for climbing. The only other place they could be was in the water. I studied every inch of the water I could see, urgently attempting to focus on the sections of the pool that were hidden in the shadows. My greatest concern was that my sight would be drawn to someone looking out of the water at me. Fortunately, no one was present. The voice then boomed out once more. It did not emerge from the lake this time. It seemed as if the air surrounding me was speaking to me. Grab the key. Unlock the door. Instead of wondering where the voice was coming from, I glanced about for anything that resembled a key of some kind. What key? In sheer dread, I screamed. Grab the key. Unlock the door. There is no key in this house. Even if there was, how was I supposed to find something so small in this area of all places? I yelled again, this time to no one in particular. My voice echoed off the walls, emphasizing the fact that I was completely alone in this location. I returned my gaze to the blade embedded in the throne. Could this be their key? Even if it was, where's the lock? I questioned aloud. I reached out again, this time fearless because I was determined to hold it this time. My fingers wrapped tightly around the hilt. The metal was cool but pleasant to hold. As I was doing so, I became aware of something. Some text was carved on the backrest of the throne. It looked suspiciously similar to the alphabet used in Orario. But I hadn't even learned to read Common Hand, so how could I read whatever this was? If the old throne is any indication, some type of ancient language. I firmly grasped the sword and slowly drew it from the seat. It caught for a brief moment before falling out completely. In the moonlight, I held it up in awe and admiration. It looked much better now that I was holding it upright, and it felt just incorrect in my hand. It felt and looked like it belonged to a brave adventurer, a valiant warrior, or perhaps a magnificent monarch. Instead, who was in possession of it? Some daedalus gutter rat who could only scrape sewage from the edges of sewer drains. And obviously, I wasn't good enough even at that because attempting to do so was what got me into this mess in the first place. My heart and mood fell as I realized, for the first time in a long time, how insignificant my existence was. I lived in a city with people who were famous around the world for their strength and accomplishments, and yet, I was nothing. The voice boomed out again during this elf-deprecating train of thought. Much louder this time. Grab the key. Turn the lock. My body froze this time. I was instantly perplexed before attempting to move my arms. They would not move, much to my horror. Then I tried out my legs. Nothing. My head and neck were the only things I could move. But not even my mouth would open on demand. I battled to regain control of my limbs while also attempting to figure out what the hell was going on. The voice came out once more, this time considerably louder. Grab the key. Turn the lock. My blood chilled as my arms and hands turned the sword around, pointing the blade towards my own chest. This was not done by me. As I saw where this was going, I made strangled noises in my throat, my head flailing around. That horrible voice rang out once more. Grab the key. Turn the lock. My arms jerked back against my wool, thrusting the blade deep into my heart. My mouth eventually opened as I coughed up enormous amounts of blood on the floor. I knelt on my knees, clutching the sword. My brain and chest were flooded and overwhelmed with pain, and I couldn't even scream. But it didn't stop there. My fingers moved up the hilt and twisted the blade around. My heart exploded, and I mean that literally, as I felt it combust in a spray of blood. So, this is what you meant by turning the lock, eh? In the midst of my misery, I managed to laugh. My eyes began to droop as I grew weaker and weaker due to the tremendous blood loss. I heard that voice again just as I was about to pass out. Awaken, King of Chaos. With a gasp, I shook my body and threw my head back. My eyesight blurred, and I felt something well up within me. I imagined a keyhole with a bright light shining through it. I saw it turn, and then it split open, showing the light behind it. As my consciousness descended within it, I eventually lost it. Everything came flooding back. My old life's recollections flashed before me like a movie screen. Everything from the day my grandmother gave birth to the day I died. All I'd done, all I'd been through. The things I'd like to do. I remembered the enormous metal birds were called planes, and the metal cocoons were called vehicles. I recalled the friends I had in my previous life. I remembered everything I'd read. I recalled my fencing abilities and the medals I'd earned in the sport. I remembered everything vital that I had forgotten I needed right now. All of the anime and manga I'd watched, all of the wiki articles I'd read. Everything I knew about each of these universes flashed back to me. Especially Danmachi, which I had seen several times before, and I understood it was the world I was living in right now. I remembered my humiliating death and meeting Necros, the person who had reborn me here. I remembered the things he'd given me, including the sword that was now stuck in my chest. I knew his name from when he sent me here. He referred to me as the King of Chaos. And all of a sudden, everything made sense. Strange occurrences as Naruto, strange occurrences that continued throughout my childhood. Chaos guarded its host with its life. It had saved me from certain death several times. That meant it has been with me since I was born, again. Uzumaki Naruto moved aside for a time while Naruto Uzumaki reappeared from the depths of my memory. When I regained consciousness, I found myself back in the cavern. My blood had left a dark smear on the ground. But this time, the blade was in my grasp, gleaming brightly with a dazzling white light. The light sparkled, encircling the entire length of the sword as well as my hand gripping it. I examined my chest and found no symptoms of a wound, though my shirt had a hole in it, the only indication that I'd been stabbed at all. The blade, which I had now identified as Arthur's holy blade Excalibur, was now gleaming much brighter in my grasp. It began to alter. I noticed the metal, as well as the handle, bending out of shape. But, with the resolve of my prior life back to me, I knew exactly what was going on. The holy sword morphed to fit the wielder. A dazzling shimmer of power flowed down the sword in my fingers. It left me with a completely new weapon in my grasp. The hand was encrusted with gems and resembled a cane. I yanked on the top, and the cane's wooden section slid apart, revealing a sharp blade inside. This was the type of weapon I was looking for. It was a shikimazu, a Japanese chikudo sword concealed within a cane, and the diamonds that decorated the earlier form were now embedded along the handle. I guess I had to stick to anime stereotypes. I was shocked as a light appeared nearby. I took the blade from its sheath and directed it at the source. On the wall above the throne, a torch had suddenly flared up. Suddenly, more and more torches began to light up with whooshing noises as they appeared around the entire cave's walls. The cavern was ultimately illuminated. Before I saw the carvings on the throne again, I held my sword up in confusion. I realized it was in English this time. It said, "Kid, congratulations. My ass." When I heard footfall approaching from the left, I swiveled around quickly to point my sword at the source of the noise. My eyes widened as I realized who was making the footsteps before narrowing again, and I unleashed all the anger I could in my next words. "You." Necros appeared, wearing an annoying smirk on his face. "How've you been, Naruto?" In general, the brightly illuminated cave was filled with the sounds of vigorous chewing and a few groans here and there. The moonlight had faded slightly, and the previous rays of silver light that had rested onto the stone throne were no longer as powerful as they had been. One reason for this was that there were no candles lighting up on the walls. There was less darkness to pick out the moonlight in. It was also because the moon was definitely setting outside. That meant that morning was getting closer and closer. A little campfire was raging on the bank of the dark pool, and a massive slice of meat was slowly turning over the flames. The steak was so juicy that the fat accumulated beneath it and trickled into the flames. When this happened, the fire would jump, unleashing a burst of heat that cooked the meat even more and warmed the people seated around it. One was a tall, black-haired, green-eyed man who was slowly turning the meat over with a spear stabbed directly through it. He was laughing and giggling at the smaller black-haired man who was wolfing down enormous chunks of meat by the fistful. "Slow down. If you keep swallowing at this rate, you'll just bring it right back up." Necros shook his head, mildly reprimanding his comrade. "Whatever. With another click of your fingers, you can conjure up another one for me to consume." Naruto responded between bites. Actually, because his mouth was so full, what he said was a jumble of unintelligible sounds. Nonetheless, Hamura understood him. Regardless, it would be unfortunate if it did occur. "So, will you please exercise some restraint?" Naruto simply huffed and continued eating, albeit at a slower speed. Hamura's only smiled and waited for the young lad's plate to be emptied. As the last piece slid down the boy's throat, he sighed deeply and contentedly. "Ah. That could be the only decent thing you've done for me thus far. I find myself being both complimented and insulted at the same time. So, get over it. You honestly think this lunch will make me forgive you for putting me through this hell?" "Whatever do you mean?" Naruto's jaw flew open in shock. "Did you seriously just ask that of me? After removing me from my homeworld and transporting me to a fictional world I had no desire to visit, and reincarnating me into this feeble body where I was forced to shovel literal s*** for a living, only to feed the addiction of my drunken ingrates whom I referred to as parents. Well, I did give you an extremely powerful supernatural power drive that slept in your body but subconsciously protected you whenever you were afraid of death. So it's not all horrible, do you think?" Naruto blinked in surprise before realizing what was going on. "Wait, you put chaos inside my body? When did you do that?" "When I reincarnated you, of course, and it did its job admirably, if I may say so." "What do you mean by protecting me? I'm confused." "Well, to put it simply, you are the host and heir of chaos," Hamura explained. "You are the one destined to harness all of its power for yourself and usher in a new age of power, whether you wish for it to be an age of darkness, light, or complete chaos. As a result, chaos regards her host with almost motherly concern, and like any mother, she will do anything she can to protect her host from approaching threats and fatalities, including acting independently of her host. For example, when that older kid tried to stab you because you had found a piece of bread on the side of the road that he desired, you froze in fear of death, and chaos responded by mangling him to death while trapping him in an eternity of hallucinations for the duration of his torture. Chaos has safeguarded you numerous times during your existence, but only now that you have awakened can it act through you." Naruto laughed. "Did I have to awaken by having the holy sword impaled through my heart and then shredded? That hurt, you know." "Well, I thought it might be interesting if you awoke the same way Arthur did. After all, you're the same in more ways than one." "How are we the same? Have you not seen your reflection since the day you came into this world?" "Well, in this medieval world, we don't exactly have mirrors everywhere to see our reflections, do we?" Hamura held up a mirror that had appeared out of nowhere in his possession. Naruto looked into the mirror for the first time in his new existence and saw the face he had been given. He screamed, "You made me look like Arthur Pendragon." "Not exactly. I gave you yellow hair instead of his original hair." "Throw that to the side. You even gave me that stupid lock of his hair that hangs down his face." Naruto unsheathed his sword, and the singular lock of hair dropped to the ground within a second. "Why did you do that?" "I didn't like it. It's a key feature in you." "No, it's a key feature in Arthur, and I'm not him." As the mirror vanished, Hamura shook his head in disappointment. He extended his hand. "Let me see your Excalibur. I despise that name, it's too cliché. Then change the name later. For now, let me see it." Naruto grimaced and gave over the Shikimazu, Hamura unsheathed it and examined the blade, twisting it around to examine every gleam, every edge. Well, you could say it's changed to suit its purpose, as has its wielder. But why, of all things, a sword in a cane? Why would I want a weapon like that? Hamura sighed and sheathed the blade once more before handing it back over. That's something I wanted to talk to you about. Naruto deadpanned as he fixed his gaze on Hamura. Why do I have the feeling I won't like this? Because you won't, Necros replied bluntly. The truth is, this should have happened the moment you awoke, but I've been holding it back with my own power. But if I'm going to train you, you'll be tested in the best way for you. Training me? What are you talking about? See for yourself. A giant mirror materialized between them, its mirrored side facing Naruto. Necros clicked his fingers while holding out his hand in front of his face. Naruto felt a great agony build up inside his entire body all of a sudden. His arms and legs began to enlarge, and black veins appeared all over his face and limbs. As blood began to dribble out of his mouth, he dropped on the ground, folding over and clutching his body tightly. Cough, cough. What's happening to me? Hamura lowered his hands and looked down at the boy with steely eyes. When Naruto saw this, he felt a cold chill run down his spine, and the pain intensified. Hamura said, "Look in the mirror." Naruto did what he was told, and what he saw astonished him. Aside from his body's terrible state, there was something fundamentally unusual about his face, notably his eyes. Arthur Pendragon's purple eyes had vanished. It had been replaced with a chilly, empty black pool with a single glowing purple pupil. He was aware of the situation. It was what Arthur went experiencing when chaos took over his body. But he'd never had these bizarre veins. What was going on with him? As you are now, you will not be able to contain chaos in your body, nor will you be able to use its power for yourself, Hamura explained coldly. This is because you are simply too weak, too incompatible with chaos, and your willpower is weak, so you are unable to exert even an ounce of authority over its rampant powers. The pain lingered as Naruto continued to look up at him, scarcely able to process what he was hearing. Chaos is unruly by nature. It cannot be controlled in any form or manner until certain conditions are met. You were one of the few souls I found who had the potential to control it. Don't let that get to your head. Just because you have the potential doesn't mean you will in the future. The secret to your power will not be able to remain hidden from certain people in this world forever. And if the wrong people discover who you are, there will be those who seek to manipulate you or perceive you as a threat and eliminate you, and you will be too weak to stop them, and you will be unable to protect yourself or those close to you. Face it, you are vulnerable and powerless despite having all the power in the world. And whose fault is that? Yelled Naruto, equally enraged and in pain. You bridged me here. You took me from my mother and stranded me here in the dirt. Do you want to go home, boy? Hamura exclaimed. Yes, please send me home. First, gain the ability to control your own destiny, and you will only be able to do so under my supervision. So, Naruto Uzumaki, will you become my apprentice? Are you on a cliché power trip? Are we trying to imitate a trope? Do you have many options? Death is the only outcome if you choose anything else, and if you die again, you will truly be lost in the void, and you can kiss goodbye to any semblance of hope you might have of seeing your homeworld again. Naruto clenched his teeth. He could feel his fragile limbs trembling, like if they were going to explode. Say it. Will you remain so weak that I can always exert my authority over you and move you around like a chess piece on my chessboard, or will you swear your loyalty to my teachings, learn sacred arts that I offer you for free, and eventually rip that ability from me? No, I'm not going to be weak. I'm going to find my way home. Then swear as a Hamura child, be the first of my familia, and I will show you the way home. Naruto's eyes drooped as blood began to drip from them. His voice becomes raspy and feeble. Why, you've only brought me here to entertain you. Will you truly keep your word and teach me how to be strong? Will you show me the way home? I will point you in the right direction to find the answer to that question, and I will train you to be the most powerful mortal this world has ever seen. That is all I will offer you. Will you serve? Naruto grunted, the pain having reached unfathomable proportions. It took every ounce of his strength to stay up. He paused for a few moments before bowing his head. I swear myself to your teachings, Master Necros, as your child, and all I ask is that you show me the path to power so that I can find the path home." Hamura smiled as he drew a large strip of fabric from his pocket and tossed it to him. He spoke in a more compassionate tone this time. "Now put this over your eyes and stand up." Naruto scowled, perplexed, but he would do anything to end this agony. He wrapped the fabric about his eyes and tied it in a tight knot around his skull. As he closed his eyes beneath, darkness invaded his view. He heard Necros go on. "As long as your eyes are closed, the majority of Chaos's powers will be held back, and you can draw from them to a reasonable extent. As you level up in the future, you will be able to open your eyes again and use Chaos's powers to their fullest extent, and nobody can stand in your way. But don't think that when you face a more powerful foe, all you have to do is remove the blindfold. Although you will be able to use Chaos for longer periods of time, the more your control will slip on her. Too much, and your body will shred apart whether you're blindfolded or not." "But what will you be teaching me, Master?" Naruto gritted his teeth, the word harsh on his tongue. "As the King of Chaos, you will be able to use many of the abilities seen in the Seven Deadly Sins anime. I will teach you some of them as a beginner's guide, but you will have to figure out the rest on your own. One of the numerous benefits of your title is the ability to utilize several magics when humans are normally limited to 3, as well as many powers not found in this world. In addition to increasing your sword skills, I will teach you how to grasp and use such talents. But how am I supposed to do all of that if I can't see?" "You can see. The host of Chaos does not require his own eyes to see. You know what I mean, you've seen it for yourself." Naruto focused his efforts. The new energy in his body that had threatened to break him apart earlier raced up to his eyes. As he peered through the blindfold, he noticed Hamura standing there, arms folded. "You can see what you want to see using Chaos," Hamura continued. "Aside from being useful in deception, Chaos will be used for a variety of other purposes, which we will go over one by one. Pick up your weapon." Excalibur was flung at him by Hamura. He took it and unsheathed the sword, pointing it at Hamura. Hamura summoned his own sword, took a posture, and placed his hand behind his back. "Show me what you're currently worth, my apprentice." After 3 months, when Naruto decided to train under Necros, the Transcendental whisked him back to Valoran, the site of their first meeting. Right now, they were trading sword attacks as one tried to shock the other, who was hellbent on scoring the hit on the more experienced fighter. Naruto exhaled deeply as sweat flowed down his nose and over his already soaked blindfold, creating a warm tickling sensation. Normally, he would wipe it away, but his current circumstances prevent him from doing so. He was currently in a defensive stance across from Hamura, holding his blade close to him as he took a few careful steps backward to get out of his teacher's range. Instead of pursuing him, Hamura straightened and waited for Naruto to make his move, his sword held out practically at arm's length. The youngster attentively evaluated his mentor's position. It was riddled with holes, but he knew from his 3 months of training that even the smallest hole was a lethal trap that would only land him another painful cut and another scar on his face. He circled his mentor, trying for another angle to attack from so that Hamura couldn't resist him as quickly. Seeing an opening, he charged forward and swung his sword. Because he was so little, he had to swing his arms up using overhead movement. Hamura didn't even turn as he brought his sword to bear on Naruto's head. Naruto ducked and used the momentum of his last strike to bring his sword lower, hoping to deliver a hit on Hamura's hip. However, in a display of superb swordsmanship, Hamura whirled his own blade in his hand and directed it downwards just in time for Naruto to meet with his. He made no evident effort to keep the holy sword from reaching his flesh. In fact, Naruto had the impression that he had just struck an immovable rock. But before he could bring the sword back, Hamura let the weight of Naruto's blow carry him forward and guided Excalibur to his side with his own weapon. Naruto's arm was dragged forward by the motion, dragging his body with him. Hamura whirled around and let Naruto pass before throwing a strong kick to the boy's back. Naruto, who has been in this situation before, ignored the pain and used the momentum of the kick to assist him roll over the ground before flipping back onto his feet in a crouching position. He drove forward with his legs, sending the most strong thrust he could summon at the elder man's midsection. But, once again, Hamura used his experience to his advantage by locking both of their hilts in one rapid movement. Hamura raised a knee and dug it into Naruto's stomach at that moment. Naruto coughed up saliva and blood, clutching his stomach so tightly that his fingers snagged on the tunic's fabric. But, once again, Hamura used his experience to his advantage by locking both of their hilts in one rapid movement. Hamura raised a knee and dug it into Naruto's stomach at that moment. Naruto coughed up saliva and blood, clutching his stomach so tightly that his fingers snagged on the tunic's fabric. Hamura leaned on one leg and placed his sword on his shoulder, tilting his head at his student. "You're getting better, Naruto. Your speed has increased tremendously, and your strikes have become heavier, but you still telegraph your attacks before you execute them. Even if a normal person can't see your eyes, I can detect where your vision rests. Plus, you keep relaxing your guard every time you think you've scored a finishing blow, despite my repeated warnings that it will cost you in a confrontation with the enemy. You are not a fair opponent. Every time you counter my attacks, you are limiting your strength and speed, and no matter how fast I become, your perception will always be able to pick up my moves before I even make them. There is no excuse for dropping your guard. You may think this is a cliché, but it is true. A fighter is always at his most vulnerable when he lands a finishing blow, or believes he has landed one. I can't help myself. When you're trying to finish someone off, you have to put everything you've got into it to make sure you finish the job. Perhaps, but you must be aware of not only your surroundings, but also where your own body parts are, as well as your opponent's. You leaned too far into my personal space, which is why I was able to knee you before you could defend yourself. You could have blocked it if you had maintained your eyes on my leg, which was the closest portion of my body to you and hence most likely the one I would attack you with. Instead, you focused your attention on my stomach, where you intended to strike, and ignored the rest of me." Naruto, his new moniker, let out a gob of saliva before picking up his sword once more. "Well, I'm still not done, so let's go." Hamura shook his head and sighed. "You're covered in bruises and cuts, and you're exhausted from overexertion. What exactly do you mean by overextending myself? You put too much energy into your bigger attacks. Keep doing that, and your stamina will be depleted before you know it. It is better to fight a stronger opponent with stamina in reserve using small, swift attacks rather than large exaggerated ones that force you to exert yourself and burn through your energy stores." While Hamura was speaking, Naruto surged forward and thrust again. But his master just sidestepped and smacked his knuckles into Naruto's temple, knocking him to the ground. "It's useless even in a surprise attack," Hamura continued. "You telegraph your method of attack, and you put too much energy into it, making it easier to read your movements. Such a blunder on your part will only cost your opponent a fleeting glance before devising a counter." Naruto sat up and fixed his gaze on his tutor. "Well, why haven't you started teaching me different sword techniques? All you've had me do is rush you and try different ways to attack you, and I can't even use traditional fencing because you see right through it. Fencing is a sport. Learning to use a blade to entertain is fundamentally and principally different from learning to use a blade to kill. You're not going to be having friendly battles with monsters in the dungeon, are you? What about the adventurers who may strive to damage you or obstruct your progress? What if you were assaulted by an unexpected assailant? All of these factors must be considered when learning how to defend yourself in this new environment." Naruto murmured, "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you." Hamura made a deadpan. "Get over it, and the sooner you brush up on your swordplay, the sooner you can return to Orario to begin your adventurer's career. For the time being, we're concentrating on increasing your speed and strengthening the power of your strikes. But you're still a long way from being adequate. Once you've mastered how to swing a sword properly and with the proper amount of force, we can start working on different sword techniques. Now go wash yourself and prepare for supper. You stink worse than the dragon's stronghold." "Why do I need to say, fire, before casting magic?" Naruto asked, holding a little flame above his clasped fists. "Because you can't properly visualize what you want to cast right now," Hamura, who was sitting close, explained. "Your magic is different from people in Danmachi. For one thing, once you've mastered it, you won't have magic slots on your falna for each individual spell like the other humans. You'll be able to cast whatever you want and how effective those spells are will depend on their power." "What exactly do you mean my magic will be different? Instead of using Danmachi magic system, you'll be using Britannia's. After all, I'm training you entirely with their parameters, don't you remember? How can I forget when you put me through hell every day? How can I forget when you make me go through hell every day? But I still don't understand why I have to say my spell before I cast it. Why do you think people chant in order to cast a spell? I'm not sure. I always thought it was necessary to say something in order to cast magic. Sigh, people chant their spells because it helps them properly visualize in their minds what they want the spell to do. You are not yet able to visualize everything properly and immaculately when casting, which is why you need to say, fire, to conjure a flame. Oh, now I get it. You had better because right now you're just learning how to conjure basic elements, and you've only done the first of a few. You still have earth, water, air, and ice to learn how to use once you've learned how to use those basic magic spells. Wow. I'm very excited, Naruto replied sarcastically. Hamura sighed and rolled his eyes. You were the one who was enchanted by the idea of enchanting Liber with demonic hellblaze and rampaging on your enemies with it like Meliodas. If you can't control this weak flame, how are you going to control fire that sears the very soul? Excalibur felt cliché and overused. Liber is a nice abbreviation. Still stupid. After a year, complete counter. Naruto utilized Liber to deflect the fireball back at Hamura, creating a chiming sound like a bell being struck. Hamura stood there for a moment, allowing the flames to engulf him before they went down, and he escaped uninjured. How does it feel to have finally gotten it this time? Aside from feeling like a complete nerd, it feels strange. Like I'm hitting a spear with a needle, but the spear is reflected back at twice its original strength and speed. That is the glory of the full counter. It doesn't matter how much magic one has, or how much more their opponent has, as long as they have enough strength and are able to actually connect with the attack, it is sent back at double what it was originally. Will this count as a magical ability? No, actually, because it's innate magic, it will count as a skill in terms of the fauna. However, full counter is Chandler's innate ability, and what I've just learned is an imitation. Imitation or not, it is still an innate ability and not a spell, so it will be a skill, and the good news is that you will not be limited by the limitations of the counterfeit. What is the limitation? Meliodas could only reflect magical attacks, while Esterosa could only reflect physical attacks. Chandler was able to do both because he was the one born with the innate ability. However, all of it originated from Chaos, who now lives inside you, so you can learn both. That's awesome. Yep. Now that you've learned how to counter magical attacks. Hamura rose up and pulled his blade. You're going to have to learn how to counteract physical ones now. Naruto stood on the notorious balcony, his blindfold removed, his eyes twitching. His face was filled with intense concentration. That's it, Hamura said. Focus on everything and keep it contained, like you're trying to screw a lid on a canister full of gas. Only when you feel it pushing too hard against your body's walls do you put the blindfold back on. Naruto's face twitched, and he remained motionless for a few seconds more before taking a deep breath and quickly closing his eyes before returning the blindfold. He panted, I could only manage 20 seconds this time. A new record. It's an impressive milestone, even if it took a year and a half to achieve. It only means you've grown stronger. Naruto, now 6.5 years old, sat at the table and sipped his cup of tea. He had a growth spurt now that he was exercising regularly and eating more nutritious meals. He was around 4 feet tall now, and while he was too young to put on any real muscle, he wasn't as thin and bony as he used to be. He was thin and fit, and the foundation for his body's subsequent development had been created. It's still strange that you went to the Star Wars universe and learned lightsaber forms, and even stranger that you're teaching me some of them. Well, you don't need the Force to jump around at unnatural heights and distances. Your physical strength is more than enough, and you're not in danger of scorching yourself on a plasma beam. But, given that your fighting style is centered on fending, I thought it would be a good idea to teach you Makashi. And, because you're nimble and agile, using your anger as a focus instead of a venting point, a little Juyo wouldn't hurt either. You've certainly become a more dangerous combatant in the past year, and I'd even go so far as to say you're a natural with the sword. Thank you for your compliment. For once, prepare for tomorrow. Why? Are there any new lessons? Yes, but it will necessitate a small expedition. To be continued.
That's it for this podcast, guys. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you did enjoy the pretty story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for help and support, and have a great day.